They say silence is golden, but in the Chicago underworld, silence is usually bought with lead. On a rainy Tuesday in November, inside the most exclusive VIP room in the city, Lorenzo Moretti, the man the FBI calls the Teflon Don, asked a trembling waitress a simple question. He expected fear. He expected begging. He expected her to look away. Instead, she looked him dead in the eye and gave an answer that didn't just silence the room. It froze the blood in everyone's veins. That waitress wasn't who she said she was, and that answer, it was the spark that burned the Moretti empire to the ground. This is the story of the dinner that changed everything. The establishment was called the Gilded Lily. It sat on the corner of Rush Street in Chicago, a fortress of limestone and bulletproof glass disguised as a high society jazz club. To the public, it was where politicians and CEOs went to drink scotch that cost more than a Honda Civic. To those in the know, it was the neutral ground for the outfit, the place where business was conducted when the phones were too hot to touch. Alice adjusted her apron in the back, her hands shaking just enough to make the silverware rattle. She took a deep breath, staring at her reflection in the tarnished mirror of the employee locker room. Brown hair pulled back tight, minimal makeup, a uniform that was 2 sizes too big to hide her figure. She looked like a ghost. That was the point. You don't want to be noticed in a place like the Gilded Lily. "Alice, table 4 needs water, now." The floor manager, a sweaty man named Rick, who smelled of onions and desperation, barked at her. "I'm going," Alice whispered, her voice rough. Table 4 wasn't just a table. It was the table. It was located in the Velvet sector, a roped-off area on a raised platform that overlooked the main floor. Tonight, the air in the club was heavier than usual. The jazz band was playing a slow, mournful rendition of Summertime, but nobody was listening. Every eye was darting toward the Velvet sector. Sitting there, surrounded by 4 men who looked like they chewed gravel for breakfast, was Lorenzo Moretti. Lorenzo wasn't just a mob boss. He was a celebrity of the underworld. At 42, he possessed a lethal charisma. He wore bespoke charcoal suits, tailored in Milan, and his eyes were the color of frozen espresso. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like a CEO who happened to murder people. He had taken over the family business 5 years ago, after his father, Don Stefano, died of a sudden heart attack. Since then, the body count in Chicago had tripled, but the arrests had gone down to 0. Alice gripped the silver water pitcher. She knew the rules. Don't make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. Be invisible. She walked up the 3 plush steps to the Velvet sector. The security guard, a man named Brutus, who had a scar running from his ear to his chin, patted her down. He checked her apron, her hair bun, even the soles of her shoes. "Clean," Brutus grunted, stepping aside. Alice approached the table. The smell hit her first. Expensive leather, cigar smoke, and the metallic tang of fear coming from the man sitting opposite Lorenzo. That man was distinct. He was older, balding, wearing a suit that looked cheap next to Lorenzo's. This was Carmine Russo, a mid-level bookie who had been short on his payments for 3 months. "Please, Lorenzo," Carmine was whispering, sweat dripping off his nose onto the pristine white tablecloth. "I just need another week. My nephew in Jersey. He's moving the product." Lorenzo didn't look at Carmine. He was busy inspecting the label of the wine bottle on the table. "This is a 2015 Barolo," Lorenzo said, his voice smooth like velvet, wrapped around a razor blade. "It needs to breathe, Carmine, just like you need to breathe. But if you cork it too early, it turns into vinegar." Alice stepped in to pour the water. She moved with practiced efficiency, filling the glasses of the bodyguards first. Dominic, Lorenzo's right-hand man, watched her hands like a hawk. When she reached Lorenzo, he didn't move. He didn't acknowledge her. He just kept staring at Carmine, who was now shaking. "I'm not vinegar, Lorenzo. I'm family," Carmine pleaded. "Family pays their debts," Lorenzo said softly. He finally looked up, but not at Carmine. He looked at Alice. For a split second, time stopped. Alice felt the blood drain from her face. Lorenzo's gaze was intense, analytical. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking into her. He was dissecting her like a biological specimen. "Waitress," Lorenzo said. The jazz band seemed to stop playing. The chatter in the room died down. Even Carmine stopped sweating for a second. "Yes, sir?" Alice asked, keeping her eyes lowered to the knot of his silk tie. "Distinctive scent," Lorenzo murmured, leaning back in his chair. "Vanilla and gun oil?" Alice's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "It's just the cleaning polish for the tables, sir." Lorenzo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Look at me." She hesitated. To disobey was death. To obey was dangerous. She slowly lifted her chin. Her hazel eyes met his dark ones. "You have steady hands for a girl serving a table of wolves," Lorenzo observed. "What is your name?" "Alice, sir." "Alice?" He tested the name, tasting it. "A biblical name. The mother of nations. Tell me, Alice, do you know who I am?" "Everyone knows who you are, Mr. Moretti," she replied softly. Lorenzo chuckled, a dry sound. He gestured to Carmine, who was looking like he was about to vomit. "This man here, Carmine. He thinks I'm a monster. He thinks I'm going to have him killed tonight because he lost $500,000 of my money." Lorenzo turned his gaze back to Alice, his eyes locking onto hers with a terrifying intensity. "So I have a question for you, Alice. A simple question. The answer will decide if Carmine walks out of here, or if he gets carried out in pieces." The tension in the room was suffocating. Dominic's hand drifted towards a bulge in his jacket. Carmine looked at Alice with desperate, pleading eyes. "Save me." "Ask your question, sir," Alice said. Her voice didn't waver. Lorenzo leaned forward, resting his chin on his steepled fingers. "If you saw a man commit a sin to save his family, is he a hero, or is he a sinner?" It was a trap, a philosophical trap. If she said hero, she condoned his violence. If she said sinner, she insulted him. Most people would have stuttered. Most people would have given a generic answer like, "It depends." But Alice wasn't most people, and she wasn't just a waitress. She placed the water pitcher down on the table with a soft clink. She looked at Carmine, then at Dominic, and finally back at Lorenzo. "That's the wrong question, Mr. Moretti," she said clearly. The silence that followed was deafening. Dominic stood up halfway. Nobody told Lorenzo Moretti he was wrong. "Sit down, Dom," Lorenzo commanded, never breaking eye contact with Alice. He looked intrigued. "The wrong question? Then enlighten me, Alice. What is the right question?" "The question isn't about the sin," Alice said, her voice dropping an octave, losing the Midwestern waitress accent and shifting into something sharper, more refined. "The question is, did the family deserve to be saved?" Lorenzo froze. The air conditioner hummed. The ice in the glasses cracked. "And," Alice continued, leaning in slightly, breaking every protocol of the club, "if you bury the sin deep enough, does it stay dead? Or does it grow back?" Lorenzo's face went pale. It was a subtle shift, but to those who knew him, it was an earthquake. "Who are you?" Lorenzo whispered. Alice smiled, and it was the terrifying smile of a predator revealing itself. "I'm the invoice, Lorenzo, and I've come to collect." The crash of glass shattered the moment. Carmine, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, but not understanding it, had knocked over his wine glass in a panic. The red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like a fresh gunshot wound. "Get her!" Dominic roared, realizing too late that the threat wasn't the bookie. It was the girl. Two bodyguards lunged across the table. Alice didn't flinch. She didn't run. With a movement too fast for a waitress, she grabbed the steak knife from Carmine's setting, a serrated, heavy blade, and slammed it down into the table, pinning Lorenzo's expensive silk tie to the wood. "Sit," she commanded. Lorenzo raised a hand, halting his men instantly. The tip of the knife was an inch from his throat, but he wasn't looking at the blade. He was looking at her eyes. He recognized them now. "Everybody back," Lorenzo ordered, his voice strained. "Boss, she's armed," Dominic started. "I said back," Lorenzo roared, slamming his fist on the table. The guards retreated a step, hands hovering over their holsters. The guests in the velvet sector were now screaming and scrambling for the exits. Below on the main floor, the music stopped abruptly. "You have 3 minutes before my security team realizes what's happening," Lorenzo said, surprisingly calm. "You pinned my tie, not my hand. You don't want to kill me? Not yet." "Killing you is easy, Lorenzo," Alice said. "I could have poisoned your water. I could have slit your throat when I poured the wine. I want you to remember." "Remember what?" "New York, winter, 1999. The warehouse on 42nd Street." Lorenzo's eyes widened. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Alice reached up and pulled the pins from her hair. Dark brown waves cascaded down her shoulders. She grabbed a napkin and wiped the concealer from her right cheek, revealing a small, star-shaped scar just below her eye. Lorenzo gasped. "Isabella?" "Isabella Vitti," she corrected him. "Daughter of Luca Vitti, the man you swore to protect, the man you executed." The name hit the room like a bomb. Luca Vitti had been the capo of the New York faction, a man who had tried to unite the families. History books and police reports said Luca Vitti died in a gas leak explosion along with his wife and 7-year-old daughter. "I saw the bodies," Lorenzo said, his voice shaking. "I saw the fire. I identified the dental records myself." "You identified what you paid the coroner to find," Isabella spat. "You burned the house down, Lorenzo. You thought everyone was inside, but I was in the cellar. I was playing hide and seek. I heard the shots. I heard my father beg you." "He didn't beg for his life. He begged for mine." Lorenzo closed his eyes for a brief second. "I didn't pull the trigger, Isabella." "No. You just gave the order. Clean slate. Isn't that what you called it?" "It was war," Lorenzo hissed, leaning forward, ignoring the knife near his throat. "Your father was going to turn evidence. He was going to the feds. He was going to bring down the entire commission. I had to choose, the family or him. So you chose power. I chose survival. And look where it got you." Isabella gestured around the room. "Sitting in a golden cage, surrounded by men who would shoot you in the back for $1, drinking wine with a man you're about to murder over money. You're a king of ashes, Lorenzo." "Why now?" Lorenzo asked. "It's been 20 years. Why tonight?" Isabella's expression hardened. "Because last week you made a mistake. You expanded your operations into frantic shipping. You bought a container port in Jersey. So, container 404. You didn't check the manifest. You just signed the clearance." Lorenzo frowned. "That was a routine shipment. Car parts." "It wasn't car parts," Isabella said, tears finally welling in her eyes, though her voice remained steady. "It was girls. Human trafficking, Lorenzo." "My father was a criminal, yes. He ran numbers. He hijacked trucks. But he had a code. No women, no children. You broke the code." Lorenzo looked genuinely confused. "I don't run flesh. That's not my business. I forbade it. Then someone is using your name, and your signature is on the paperwork," Isabella said. "I work for the DOJ now, Lorenzo. Not officially. I'm a ghost consultant. I spent 20 years becoming the thing that hunts men like you. I have the files. I have the proof. And at midnight tonight, that file goes to the FBI, the CIA, and the press. Unless," Lorenzo asked, "unless you give me the name of the man who actually runs the port. Because if you say it wasn't you, then there is a traitor at your table." Isabella's eyes flicked to Dominic. Lorenzo followed her gaze. Dominic, the loyal right hand, had taken a step back. His face was a mask of sweat. His hand was gripping his gun, but he wasn't aiming at Isabella. He was aiming at Lorenzo. "Dom?" Lorenzo asked, his voice low. "She's lying, boss," Dominic said, his voice cracking. "She's a Fed. Shoot her. I'll do it." "Put the gun down, Dom," Lorenzo said. slowly standing up, ripping his tie free from the knife. "I can't do that, Lorenzo," Dominic said. "The shipment, it's worth 50 million. The Colombians are waiting. I couldn't let you say no again. You're getting soft. You have morals. Morals are bad for business." The realization washed over Lorenzo. The betrayal wasn't from the past. It was standing right beside him. "You used my seal," Lorenzo said. "You used my name to sell children. I made us rich," Dominic screamed. "And now this bitch is going to ruin it." Dominic raised his gun. Bang! The shot echoed through the gilded lily like a cannon blast. Isabella flinched. Lorenzo didn't move. Dominic looked down at his chest. A red flower was blooming on his white shirt. He looked up, confused, then collapsed to the floor. Behind him, holding a smoking pistol, stood Carmine, the shaking, sweating bookie. I, Carmine stammered, holding the gun with 2 hands. "He was going to shoot you, Lorenzo. I cleared my debt. Are we good?" Lorenzo looked at the dead body of his best friend, then at the waitress who was actually a ghost from his past. "Clear the room," Lorenzo shouted to his remaining guards. "Get everyone out, now!" He turned to Isabella. The dynamic had shifted. They weren't enemies anymore. They were 2 people standing in a graveyard of secrets. "You have the files?" Lorenzo asked. "On a secure server," Isabella said. "If I don't check in by 1 a.m., they go public." Lorenzo nodded. He walked over to the table, poured a fresh glass of the Barolo, and drank it in 1 shot. "You came here to destroy me, Isabella. But it seems you just saved my life." "I didn't do it for you," she said coldly. "I want the network." Dominic was just the middleman. Who were the buyers? Lorenzo adjusted his suit jacket. "The buyers are people you can't touch with a badge, Isabella. They are people who own the judges and the senators." "Then we do it my way," she said. "And what is your way?" Isabella picked up the knife again. "We burn it down. All of it." Lorenzo looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire her father had. He realized then that the girl he thought he had killed 20 years ago had grown up to be far more dangerous than Luca Vitti ever was. "Okay," Lorenzo said, extending his hand. "Partner." Isabella looked at his hand, the hand that signed her father's death warrant. "Not partners," she said, ignoring his hand. "Assets. You are my asset now, Lorenzo. And if you lie to me once, I won't use a knife next time." "Understood," Lorenzo said, a strange smirk playing on his lips. "So where do we start?" "We have to leave. Now," Isabella said. "Dominic wasn't working alone. Look at your other guards." Lorenzo looked around. The other 3 guards were speaking into their earpieces, looking at Lorenzo not with loyalty, but with calculation. The coup wasn't just Dominic. It was a takeover. "Run," Lorenzo whispered. And for the first time in his life, the King of Chicago turned and ran, following the waitress through the kitchen doors into the dark, rainy alleyway of the night. The heavy steel door of the kitchen slammed shut behind them, muting the chaos inside the gilded lily. But the alleyway offered no safety. The Chicago rain was coming down in sheets, turning the grease-stained asphalt into a black mirror. Lorenzo instinctively turned left towards the VIP parking lot, where his armored Cadillac Escalade waited. "Wrong way," Isabella barked, grabbing the sleeve of his soaking wet designer suit. "My car is bulletproof," Lorenzo snapped, wiping rain from his eyes. "It has a sat phone and a medical kit. Your car is a coffin," she countered, pulling him towards the dumpsters. "Dominic planned this coup. Do you think he didn't plant a bomb in the ignition? Or at the very least, track the GPS? If you get in that car, you're dead in 10 seconds. As if to punctuate her point, the back door of the club burst open. 2 men, Lorenzo's own security detail, Arthur and Silas, stepped out, guns drawn. They didn't shout. They didn't hesitate. They raised their weapons. Pop, pop. Bullets sparked against the brick wall inches from Lorenzo's head. He flinched, not out of fear, but out of the sheer surrealism of it. These were men he had invited to his daughter's christening, men he had paid bonuses to last Christmas. "Move!" Isabella shoved him behind a stack of wooden pallets. She reached into her apron, which she still hadn't taken off, and pulled out a compact Glock 26. It was small, concealable, and deadly in the right hands. She didn't fire wildly. She took a breath, waited for Silas to round the dumpster, and fired 2 controlled shots. One hit Silas in the shoulder, the other shattered the light bulb above the door, plunging the alley into semi-darkness. "Go, the grey Honda!" she yelled. Lorenzo Moretti, a man worth $300 million, sprinted through the slush and garbage toward a rusted, dented 2011 Honda Civic. "You have to be joking," Lorenzo muttered as he yanked the passenger door open. The interior smelled of stale coffee and cheap vanilla air freshener. Isabella dove into the driver's seat, started the engine, and threw the car into reverse before Lorenzo had even closed his door. The tires squealed, struggling for traction on the wet pavement, before gripping and shooting the car backward out of the alley. Arthur ran out into the street, firing at the retreating taillights. The back window shattered, spraying safety glass all over Lorenzo's lap. "Keep your head down!" Isabella screamed, shifting gears and drifting the car around a tight corner onto Rush Street. "They're following," Lorenzo said, peering through the side mirror. A black SUV, one of his fleet, was roaring up behind them, its high beams blinding. "Fasten your seatbelt," Isabella said calmly. "I'm being chased by my own hitmen in a car that struggles to hit 60. And you want me to wear a seatbelt? I want you to survive so I can put you in prison," she retorted. "Click it." Lorenzo clicked the belt. Isabella didn't drive like a waitress. She drove like a stuntman. She took a sharp right, hopping the curb, and dove into the labyrinth of Lower Wacker Drive, the underground network of streets beneath downtown Chicago. It was a place where GPS signals died and cell reception vanished. The Honda's engine screamed as she weaved between pillars and delivery trucks. The black SUV was heavier, faster in a straight line, but clumsy in the tight turns. "They're gaining," Lorenzo warned. The SUV rammed the back bumper, jolting their necks. "Hold on," Isabella said. She saw what Lorenzo didn't. Up ahead, a delivery truck was backing into a loading dock, narrowing the road. Most drivers would brake. Isabella floored it. "You're not going to fit," Lorenzo yelled, gripping the "oh shit" handle above the door. "Physics is a suggestion," she whispered. She swerved at the last second, the passenger mirror scraping sparks against the concrete pillar, the driver's side missing the truck's bumper by an inch. They shot through the gap like a bullet through a barrel. The SUV behind them wasn't so lucky. The driver slammed on the brakes too late. The massive vehicle clipped the truck, spun out of control, and slammed into a concrete support beam with a bone-shaking crunch. Isabella didn't slow down. She took 3 random turns in the underground maze, checking for tails, before finally emerging back up to surface level in a completely different part of the city. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold, throbbing silence. Lorenzo brushed the glass off his suit pants. He looked at the woman driving. Her hair was wild, her waitress uniform was stained with sweat and grime, and her eyes were constantly scanning the mirrors. "Where did you learn to drive like that?" he asked quietly. "The academy?" "Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe," she answered, her eyes back on the road. "Plus 2 years undercover as a getaway driver in Miami. I've done this before, Lorenzo. Just never with a passenger I hated this much." Lorenzo looked out the window. The city he thought he owned looked different from the passenger seat of a Honda. It looked hostile. "You don't hate me," Lorenzo said, testing the waters. "You hate the idea of me." "I hate the man who burned my house down," she corrected him sharply. "Don't try to psychoanalyze me, Moretti. You're not the boss right now. You're the cargo." "Fair enough," Lorenzo nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket for his phone. "Don't." Isabella slapped his hand away. "If you turn that on, the NSA, the FBI, and your traitorous lieutenant will triangulate us in 30 seconds. Throw it out the window. It has my encrypted contacts, my bank codes." "Do you want to be rich and dead, or poor and alive? Lorenzo hesitated. He looked at the sleek black device, his lifeline to power. Then he rolled down the window and tossed it into the Chicago River as they crossed the bridge. "Good," Isabella said. "Now welcome to the bottom of the food chain." They drove for 40 minutes in silence, heading south toward the industrial wastelands near the Indiana border. The skyline of Chicago, usually a beacon of gold and silver, faded into the rear-view mirror, replaced by rusting smokestacks and abandoned warehouses. Isabella pulled the car into a derelict boatyard. Rows of dry-docked vessels sat rotting on wooden blocks. She killed the lights and navigated by moonlight until she reached a small, corrugated metal shack at the edge of the water. "Get out," she commanded. Lorenzo stepped out into the mud. His Italian leather shoes were ruined. "This is your safe house?" "It's a bolt hole. Nobody knows about it. Not the agency, not my handlers. Just me." She unlocked the padlock and shoved the door open. Inside, it smelled of sawdust and old diesel. There was a cot in the corner, a dusty computer set up on a workbench, and a wall covered in maps and photographs. Isabella flipped a switch, and a single naked bulb buzzed to life. Lorenzo walked to the wall. He froze. The wall was a timeline, a spiderweb of red string connecting photos, newspaper clippings, and police reports. At the center of the web wasn't Lorenzo. It was a man Lorenzo recognized, but hadn't thought about in years. "Senator William Thorne," Lorenzo whispered. "The man who pays you," Isabella said, locking the door behind them and pulling a fresh magazine for her Glock from a drawer. "Or the man you thought worked for you." Lorenzo turned around, his face pale. "Thorne is on my payroll. I bought his seat in the Senate 10 years ago. You bought a shark, Lorenzo, and sharks don't have masters. They have appetites." Isabella walked over to the computer and booted it up. "Thorne is the one buying the girls. Dominic was just the logistics manager." Dominic realized that with Thorne's political protection, he didn't need you anymore. You were a relic, a traditionalist mob boss who wouldn't touch drugs or trafficking. You were bad for the bottom line. Lorenzo sat down on a wooden crate, his legs suddenly feeling heavy. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just a mutiny. It was a corporate, hostile takeover. So the container 404, Isabella typed furiously on the keyboard. "It's scheduled to leave the Jersey port in 48 hours. Destination, St. Petersburg. If that ship leaves, those 30 girls are gone forever." She spun around in the chair to face him. "I spent 5 years building a case against you, Lorenzo. I was ready to take you down for racketeering, money laundering, murder, but then I found the shipping manifest. I realized you were the wrong target. Or rather, you were the shield hiding the real target. Thorne!" Lorenzo spat the name like a curse. "Thorne wants you dead because you're the only one who can link him to the underworld. If you die, the narrative is simple. Gang war. Mob boss killed by his own men. Thorne gives a speech about cleaning up the streets, and his shipment sails quietly into the night." Lorenzo looked at his hands. "I killed your father because he threatened the family. I thought I was protecting something sacred. Now, I realize I was just protecting a business. Don't look for redemption, Lorenzo." "It doesn't suit you," Isabella said, her voice hard, though her eyes softened just a fraction. She stood up and walked to a small mini-fridge, tossing him a bottle of water. "Drink. You'd look like hell." Lorenzo caught the bottle. "Why didn't you let them kill me? You could have let Dominic shoot me, then arrested Dominic." "Because Dominic wouldn't know where the ledger is," Isabella said. The room went silent. "The black ledger," Lorenzo said softly. "The myth." "It's not a myth, is it?" Isabella stepped closer, invading his personal space. "My father told me about it before he died. He said the Vitti family and the Moretti family kept a shared insurance policy. A physical book, handwritten, no digital footprint. It contains every bribe, every payoff, every judge and senator bought since 1980. Lorenzo stared at her. That book is the nuclear option. If released, it destroys the city. Not just the mob. The police, the courts, the mayor's office, everything burns. Thorne is betting that the book is lost, or that you won't use it because it implicates you too. Isabella leaned down, her face inches from his. But you're a dead man walking, Lorenzo. You have nothing left to lose. I need that book. I need to bury Thorne. Lorenzo laughed, a dark, humorless sound. You want me to hand over the history of the Chicago underworld to a Fed? I'm not asking as a Fed, Isabella said. I'm asking as the daughter of the man who helped write it. Lorenzo studied her. He saw the strength in her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes. She was right. He was done. His empire was gone. His men were hunting him. The only thing he had left was vengeance. The book isn't in Chicago, Lorenzo said. Isabella straightened up. Where is it? It's in the one place nobody would ever look for a mafia ledger. Lorenzo stood up, regaining some of his composure. It's in a safety deposit box in a small credit union in rural Wisconsin, under the name Alice Jenkins. Isabella's eyes widened. You knew? I knew of you, Lorenzo admitted. I didn't know you were the waitress, but I knew Luca had a daughter who survived. I kept tabs on you for years, Isabella. I made sure you got into that foster home in Ohio. I anonymously paid for your tuition at Georgetown. Isabella took a step back, stunned. You're lying. Am I? Lorenzo smirked. Check the funding for the St. Jude scholarship you received. It came from a shell company, VT Holdings. Isabella felt the room spin. The man she had hated for 20 years, the monster in her nightmares, had been her benefactor? It didn't wash away the blood, but it complicated the hate. Why? She whispered. Guilt, Lorenzo said simply. It's a powerful motivator. I killed your father, but I couldn't kill his legacy. I put the ledger in a box under your alias. I figured, if I ever died, the key would eventually find its way to you. It was your inheritance. I don't want your money. It's not money. It's truth. And right now, it's our only weapon. Suddenly, the computer on the desk beeped, a shrill, rhythmic alarm. Isabella snapped out of her daze and rushed to the screen. Her face went pale. What is it? Lorenzo asked. Silent alarm, she said, grabbing her jacket. Motion sensors on the perimeter fence just tripped. They found us. How? I threw the phone. They didn't track the phone, Isabella said, checking her pistol. They tracked the car. I didn't think they'd have satellite access this fast. Thorne must be pulling strings at the NSA. We're trapped? No, Isabella said, a dangerous glint returning to her eyes. We're not trapped. We're bait. She reached under the workbench and pulled out a duffel bag. She tossed it to Lorenzo. It was heavy. What's this? He asked, unzipping it to reveal a pump-action shotgun and a flare gun. Plan B, she said. If we can't outrun them, we have to outsmart them. Can you shoot? Lorenzo racked the shotgun slide, the sound crisp and metallic. I didn't become the boss by talking, Isabella. Good, she said, kicking the back door open towards the water, where a small tarp-covered speedboat bobbed in the dark. Because tonight, class is in session. The sound of tires crunching on gravel echoed outside. High-powered flashlights swept across the windows of the shack. Come out, Moretti! A voice boomed. It was a voice Lorenzo knew well. It wasn't a guard. It was corrupt Detective Miller from the 14th Precinct. Thorne had sent the cops. Cops! Lorenzo hissed. We can't shoot cops. That brings the National Guard. Dirty cops, Isabella corrected. And in the dark, everyone looks like a criminal. She raised the flare gun and fired it, not into the sky, but directly at a stack of oil drums near the entrance of the boatyard. The explosion was instantaneous. A wall of fire erupted, separating the police cruisers from the shack. Run! Isabella screamed. They sprinted for the boat as bullets whizzed past them, buzzing like angry hornets. Lorenzo jumped in, untied the rope, and Isabella fired the engine. As they roared away from the dock, disappearing into the black waters of Lake Michigan, Lorenzo looked back at the burning shoreline. "Wisconsin!" he yelled over the roar of the motor. "Wisconsin!" she yelled back. The simple question had been asked. The answer had been given. Now the war had begun. The wind on Lake Michigan in November cuts through bone faster than a knife. By the time Isabella steered the small speedboat into a rocky inlet near Kenosha, Wisconsin, both she and Lorenzo were shivering violently. Their clothes were soaked, heavy with freezing water and the grime of the Chicago River. They abandoned the boat under a rotting wooden pier. Isabella moved with military precision, wiping down the steering column and the gunnels to remove fingerprints, while Lorenzo stood guard, the pump-action shotgun held awkwardly against his chest. He looked less like a don and more like a drowned rat. "We need wheels," Isabella said, her teeth chattering, "and we need to get off the grid. I have a safe house near Milwaukee," Lorenzo offered. "Burned," she cut him off. "If Thorne has access to your logistics, he knows every property you own. We need something anonymous." They hiked a mile inland, sticking to the tree line, until they found a farmhouse with a detached garage. A rusted, tan 1995 Ford F-150 sat in the driveway. It wasn't pretty, but it had plates that wouldn't trigger an automatic license plate reader. "Hotwire it?" Lorenzo asked. "Don't be a cliché," Isabella muttered. She checked the sun visor. Keys fell into her lap. Farmers trust their neighbors. As they merged onto the interstate, heading north into the deep darkness of rural Wisconsin, the heater finally kicked in, blasting dusty, warm air into the cab. The adrenaline began to wear off, leaving a heavy, suffocating tension in the small space. For 20 miles, neither spoke. The only sound was the hum of the tires and the rhythmic thwack-thwack of a broken windshield wiper. Lorenzo broke the silence first. "You said you worked for the DOJ. A ghost consultant. What does that actually mean?" Isabella kept her eyes on the road. "It means I don't exist, Lorenzo. I don't have a badge. I don't have a pension. I'm a contractor, hired to infiltrate organizations that the law can't touch. I get close, I gather intel, and I hand it over. Usually, I disappear before the takedown." "But not this time," Lorenzo noted. "You stayed." "I stayed because it was you." She gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I needed to know if the man who killed my father was a monster or just a man." "And? What is the verdict?" Isabella glanced at him. In the harsh yellow light of a passing street lamp, Lorenzo looked old. The veneer of the Mafia boss was gone. He looked tired, human, and strangely regretful. "You're worse than a monster," she said softly. "You're a hypocrite. You play the role of the benevolent king, funding orphanages and scholarships, my scholarship, while you sign death warrants with the same hand. You tried to buy your conscience back, Lorenzo. You thought if you paid for my college, it would wash the blood off your hands." Lorenzo looked out the window at the passing pine trees. It wasn't about conscience. It was about balance. "Your father. Luca was my best friend. But he broke the rules. He was going to talk. In our world, that's a death sentence. I didn't want to kill him, I had to. And the fire? The fire was a mistake," Lorenzo said, his voice cracking. "The gas line blew early. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. I thought I killed the whole family. When I found out a year later that you had survived, that you were in the system, I couldn't finish the job. I watched you grow up from a distance. I was proud of you, Isabella. Is that sick? Maybe. But I was proud. Proud that I became a weapon to hunt people like you. Yes," Lorenzo smiled sadly. "Irony is the only thing God finds funny." Isabella fell silent. The hatred she had nursed for 20 years was fueling her, but the lines were blurring. He wasn't the cackling villain she had imagined. He was a man trapped in a cage of his own making. "We're getting close," Lorenzo said, checking the road signs. "Oak Haven is the next exit. You know the plan?" "I go in. You stay down," Isabella said. If Thorne's men are tracking us, they'll be looking for you. I'm just a face in the crowd." "Isabella," Lorenzo warned, "if that book is in there, and if Thorne knows about it, he won't send police. He'll send the cleaners, ex-military. No badges, no rules." "I know," she said, pulling the truck off the highway onto a gravel road. "That's why we're not just going to take the book. We're going to use it." Oak Haven, Wisconsin, was the kind of town where the main street was 3 blocks long and the tallest building was the church steeple. The First Heritage Credit Union was a brick building from the 1920s, solid and unassuming. It was 8:05 a.m. The bank had just opened. Isabella parked the truck 2 blocks away in a grocery store lot. She had used a gas station bathroom to change. She had ditched the waitress uniform for jeans and a heavy flannel jacket she found behind the seat of the truck. With a baseball cap pulled low, she looked like any other local. "Stay here," she told Lorenzo. "Keep your head down. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, leave." "I'm not leaving you," Lorenzo said. "If I'm not back in 10 minutes, I'm dead," she corrected. "And you're the only one who knows where the bodies are buried. Literally." She slammed the door and walked towards the bank. The wind was biting, stinging her cheeks. She checked her watch. 8:07 a.m. Inside, the bank smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. There was one teller, an elderly woman named Martha, and a security guard who looked like he was asleep, standing up. Isabella approached the desk. "I need to access my safety deposit box. Box 404. Martha smiled warmly. "Of course, dear." "Name?" "Alice Jenkins." Martha checked her computer. "Ah, yes, Alice Jenkins. You haven't visited us in, my goodness, 20 years. Since the account was opened." "I've been away," Isabella said, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every second felt like an hour. "I'll need your key and a signature." Isabella produced the small brass key Lorenzo had given her in the car. She signed the logbook. Her hand didn't shake. Martha led her to the vault. It was a heavy steel room lined with hundreds of metal drawers. Martha unlocked box 404, slid the long metal tray out, and placed it on a table in a private viewing booth. "Take your time, dear." Martha closed the privacy door. Isabella wasted no time. She flipped the lid of the metal box open. It wasn't empty. Sitting inside, wrapped in oilcloth to prevent moisture damage, was a thick, leather-bound ledger. It looked ancient. Next to it was a flash drive, newer, taped to the leather cover. Isabella opened the book. Her eyes scanned the pages. November 12th, 1998. Payment to District Attorney Reynolds, $50,000. Case dismissed. July 4th, 2005. Construction contract. City Hall. Kickback to Mayor's Fund. $200,000. August 20th, 2015. Senator William Thorne. Campaign contribution. Wire transfer via Shell Corp. Blue Heron. $2.50 million. It was all there. Every bribe. Every fix. Every dirty secret of Chicago's elite for the last 3 decades. The flash drive likely contained the digital wire trails to prove it. "Jackpot," Isabella whispered. She shoved the ledger and the drive into her jacket. She turned to leave. That's when she heard it. The sound of the bank's front door opening. Not the gentle ding-dong of a customer, but the heavy, forceful slam of the door hitting the wall. "Everybody on the ground, now!" The voice was professional, loud, and terrifying. Isabella froze. She cracked the privacy door open just an inch. 4 men were in the lobby. They wore tactical vests, balaclavas, and carried suppressed assault rifles. These weren't bank robbers. They weren't asking for cash. "Manager!" The leader shouted. He was a giant of a man, moving with fluid, lethal grace. "We know she's here. Alice Jenkins. Box 404. Bring her out, and nobody gets hurt." Martha, the teller, was trembling behind the glass. She's in the vault." Isabella's blood ran cold. Thorne's reach was faster than she thought. They must have flagged the name Alice Jenkins in the banking system the moment Martha typed it in. It was a silent tripwire. She was trapped in a steel box with one exit. Isabella looked around the small viewing room. No windows, air vent too small. She had her Glock, but she had maybe 10 rounds left. 4 men with automatic weapons? It was suicide. She pulled out her phone. No signal inside the vault. "Come out, Isabella," the leader shouted. "We know who you are. The senator sends his regards." Isabella gripped the ledger. This book was the only thing keeping her alive. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from outside, the sound of glass shattering and metal crunching. Then a roar. The truck. Isabella heard the distinct engine whine of the Ford F-150. "Lorenzo! Crash!" The front of the bank exploded inward as the tan pickup truck rammed through the plate glass window and the brick wall, plowing into the lobby. Dust and debris filled the air. The tactical team scattered, diving for cover. The driver's door flew open. Lorenzo Moretti stumbled out, coughing, blood running down his forehead from the impact. He raised the pump-action shotgun. Boom! He fired blindly into the ceiling, creating chaos. "Isabella, move!" Lorenzo screamed, his voice raw. The tactical leader recovered first. He raised his rifle toward Lorenzo. "Drop him!" Isabella kicked the vault door open. She didn't run away. She ran towards the fight. She raised her Glock and fired 2 shots. The leader ducked, his aim spoiled. "Get in!" Isabella screamed, grabbing Lorenzo by the collar of his ruined suit. The truck was totaled. Steam hissed from the radiator. "The truck is dead!" Lorenzo yelled. "The back door!" Isabella pointed. They scrambled over the rubble of the bank counter, past the terrified teller, and burst out the rear emergency exit into the alleyway. Bullets chewed up the doorframe behind them. "They're right behind us!" Lorenzo gasped. He was limping now, a shard of glass embedded in his thigh. They ran down the alley, turning a corner onto the main street. The tactical team spilled out of the bank, weapons raised. Isabella and Lorenzo were exposed. Open ground, 50 yards to the nearest cover. "It's over," Lorenzo wheezed, stopping. He turned to face the men. "Give me the book, Isabella. I'll trade it for your life." "No," Isabella said, grabbing his arm. The tactical team slowed down. They formed a firing line. The leader stepped forward, removing his mask. He had a scar across his nose. "End of the line, Moretti," the man said. "Hand over the ledger." Lorenzo looked at Isabella. Then he looked at the hit squad. "You want the book?" Lorenzo shouted, his voice regaining that old command voice of the Don. "Come and get it." The leader raised his hand to signal the fire order. But then a sound cut through the air. A siren. Not a police siren. A deep, reverberating horn. A massive Greyhound bus, heading for the interstate, came barreling down the main street. Isabella saw it. "Jump!" she screamed. As the bus passed between them and the gunmen, cutting off the line of sight, Isabella and Lorenzo didn't dive for cover. They dove for the bus's luggage compartment, which the driver had left unlatched on the side. They tumbled into the dark, luggage-filled hold just as the bus roared past the alley. The gunmen opened fire, bullets pinging off the metal side of the bus. But the driver, panicked by the sound of gunfire, floored the accelerator. Inside the dark, swaying hold, lying on top of a suitcase filled with someone's vacation clothes, Lorenzo and Isabella gasped for air. Lorenzo laughed. It was a manic, breathless laugh. "We're alive," he said. Isabella held up the leather book in the darkness. "We're not just alive, Lorenzo," she said, her eyes burning in the gloom. "We're armed. And now, we're going to war." She pulled out her phone. The signal bars returned. "Who are you calling?" Lorenzo asked. "I'm not calling anyone," Isabella said, opening the camera app and pointing it at the ledger. "I'm going live." In the claustrophobic darkness of the luggage compartment, the blue light of the smartphone screen illuminated Isabella's face like a phantom. She didn't call the police. She didn't call the FBI. She opened a live stream app, tagged every major news outlet in Chicago, and hit Go Live. "Are you sure?" Lorenzo asked, his voice rough from the dust. "Once you press that button, there's no going back." for either of us. The world needs to know Lorenzo. Not just a judge in a closed courtroom. The world. She hit the button. "My name is Isabella Vitti," she spoke clearly into the camera, holding the phone steady despite the swaying of the bus. 20 years ago, my family was murdered to cover up a conspiracy. Sitting next to me is Lorenzo Moretti, the man who gave the order. But the man who paid for that order is Senator William Thorne. She opened the ledger. For 10 minutes, as the bus roared down the interstate, Isabella and Lorenzo dismantled a 30-year empire. They read dates, amounts, and names. They showed the wire transfers on the flash drive. They linked Thorne's anti-crime bill to the payoffs he received from the cartels to eliminate their competition. The viewer count jumped from 0 to 50, then 2,000, then 50,000. By the time the Greyhound bus pulled into the Milwaukee station, news helicopters were already circling overhead. "They're here," Lorenzo said, listening to the sirens wailing outside. Not the lonely siren of a hit squad, but the chaotic symphony of state troopers, local police, and federal agents. The bus screeched to a halt. The driver opened the luggage door, terrified. Lorenzo looked at Isabella. He straightened his torn suit jacket, wiped the blood from his forehead, and regained the composure of the Don one last time. "This is where we part ways, Isabella," he said softly. "You're going to prison, Lorenzo," she said, her voice wavering. "I know," he smiled, "but thanks to you, I'm walking in as the man who took down Thorne. I'm not the villain of this story anymore. I'm the witness." He climbed out of the compartment first, hands raised. "Don't shoot," Lorenzo bellowed to the wall of armed agents. "I am Lorenzo Moretti, and I have the evidence." Isabella climbed out behind him, clutching the ledger. The flashbulbs of the press blinded them. In that moment, the waitress and the mob boss stood side by side, strange allies in a war they had both won. Senator Thorne was arrested an hour later, trying to board a private jet to the Caymans. The Black Ledger led to the indictment of 12 judges, 3 mayors, and over 50 police officers. It was the largest corruption purge in U.S. history. Lorenzo Moretti was sentenced to 25 years. He refused witness protection. In prison, he wasn't a target. He was a legend, the man who burned the corrupt system to the ground. And Isabella? She didn't return to the DOJ. She didn't go back to waiting tables. 6 months later, a woman entered the visitation room of the maximum security federal penitentiary. She sat behind the glass. Lorenzo picked up the phone. "You look good, Alice," Lorenzo said, using her waitress name with a smirk. "Isabella," she corrected him, smiling. She placed a hand on the glass. "I brought you something." She held up a photo. It was a picture of the port in Jersey. Empty. The containers were gone. The trafficking ring was dismantled. "Simple question," Isabella whispered into the phone. "Was it worth it?" Lorenzo looked at the photo, then at the woman who had put a knife to his throat and saved his soul. "Yes," he said. "It was." Lorenzo Moretti went into that club to collect a debt, but he ended up paying the ultimate price for his sins. He lost his freedom, but he regained his humanity. And Isabella? She proved that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the man with the gun. It's the person with the truth. They say you should never ask a question if you aren't prepared for the answer. Lorenzo Moretti asked a simple question, and the answer changed the world. Wow, what a ride! If you enjoyed this twisty mafia thriller, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Let me know in the comments, if you were Isabella, would you have saved Lorenzo or let the hitmen take him? I'll see you in the next video.